which leads to the next question. What's that going to do to the consumer that actually tries to buy these products? Because I'm guaranteeing you, I could be wrong, Heather, but I'm guessing that a business is not going to turn around and just eat that stuff, but they're going to end up raising their costs at the end of the day, aren't they?
Yes, and unfortunately it does. It sounds like a classic tax on big business, but it functions like an aggressive sales tax on consumers. And, again, imagine like everyone goes to the grocery store and buy a $10 frozen dinner. So, for that product to get to you, a farmer had to grow the crops or raise the livestock, food processor had to turn it into a frozen dinner, and a wholesaler had to facilitate it getting from the food processor to the local grocery store. And then your grocer had to staff a store at which you could purchase it. So again, each stage of that process and many more transactions could be subject to the tax. So you're seeing like right now, a $10 frozen dinner is now taxed at like just under 5%. So it would be like 49.6 cents tax.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Welcome into the American Potential Podcast. In for Jeff Crank this week, I am Andy Hooser. Jeff out and about, obviously busy with, election season and a lot of different things going on. So looking forward to sitting with you for this episode. Again, my name is Andy Hooser. I am the host of the nationally syndicated radio program, The Voice of Reason, that focuses on local activism and talking about current events all throughout the week, which as we get closer to election season, we get closer to Halloween as well. It's time for us to talk about some scary bills going on across the nation. Yeah, really scary bills, because there are some ways where the potential for the American way is going to the wayside. Are we seeing it die off? And what can we do to fight against some of that stuff? Really happy to have on the program with us this week, as she is the Western Regional State Director for Americans for Prosperity. She has been a guest on the program before as well, but really happy to have on Heather Andrews. Heather, how are you today?
Hey, doing good. Thanks so much.
Yeah, so excited to chat with you on the program today, and especially with the spooky, scary season that we're living in. It's an odd time for sure. And I got to be honest, I never thought that we would get to the stage that we're at with some of the legislation or even just the rhetoric being talked about on the campaign trails all throughout the country. But I want to talk first and foremost about you just a little bit. It is Halloween. It is a scary time. So I need to ask you, what is one of the scariest things that you've done in your lifetime? Because I know that you're kind of scared of heights, aren't you?
Yeah, yes, very, very afraid of heights, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. What's one of the scariest things that you've done? Have you broken that fear? Have you done like a Fear Factor episode?
Yeah, right. No. But yeah, no. I recently, I started dating a guy who is big into canyoneering. He's huge into doing all the epic canyons, especially in Utah area and Zion. And so I decided to go with him on one of his adventures and try out this slot canyon rappel. And it was like the first rappel was off of a tree stump to give you an idea of what it looked like, and 355-foot rappel into the slot canyon. So it wasn't just, a little rappel. It was pretty significantly large, and starting from a tree trunk wasn't exactly my favorite either, but yeah, like I conquered my fear of heights during that. There was like 11 more rappels after that through the canyon. It's just beautiful though. You get to see some of the most amazing parts of Zion that a lot of people don't ever get to see, but it's like, kind of also like the things you do for love, I guess, Yeah, what you do for your significant other. Well, kudos to you on that one, facing your fear. That's pretty incredible. So the next step, skydiving now, right? Oh, no, I have no desire whatsoever. And honestly, he's big into skydiving, and I've already told him, like, no,
that's where you're drawing the line.
That's where I'm drawing the line. Yep.
Not doing that one. I love it. Well, good. Well, congrats on facing the fear. That's exciting. That would be a beautiful sight to see. That would be really neat. Let's talk about, for just a moment, up in your region. Let's go to the great state of Oregon for a moment. Obviously, with election season coming up and talking about some of the scary candidates, scary legislation, scary bills that we could potentially see after November's election. There's an entirely another level that I never thought that we would hit in the country, which is the idea of a universal basic income. And to put it into perspective, I mean, we saw this kind of attempted almost at a national level a few years back during the COVID pandemic, nationwide, when it was the child tax credit that was being paid monthly to individuals, even to people that didn't even qualify for the tax exemption of the child tax credit. on their federal income taxes. And we've seen also kind of some startups with different states trying to apply this same policy in their own level. But Oregon's taken this to an entirely different level. What's going on here?
Right. So, yeah, Measure 118 was filed by a gentleman named Antonio Gisbert. He is a Portland resident and former labor organizer. And he began putting together the idea with a group of friends in about 2018. And just 2 years before that, actually, Oregonians, they voted down Measure 97, which was a similar proposal for taxing corporations. But this Measure 118 would tax corporations to the tune of about $8 billion a year and give money to just about every Oregonian, anywhere from $1,100 to $1,600 annually. And the only caveat is you just have to have lived in Oregon for 200 days, which is about 6 months. It's also worth noting that like virtually all of the money that was kind of spent to get the measure on the ballot actually came from 3 California donors. And they were very much proponents of trying this universal basic income. And they used the state's initiative approach to get and pay for the required 120,000 signatures. And it's relatively easy to put citizens initiatives on the ballot in Oregon. It's one of 26 states that allows initiatives or referendums to like change statutes or the Constitution. And as you can imagine, like I'm sure the pitch sounded fantastic to the average person who encountered a petition gatherer. Would you like a $1,600 annual rebate from the state for each member of your household paid for by making giant corporations pay their fair share? I am sure that was very, very,
It piques your ear a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like, it sounds really, really good and almost like too good to be true. So if this passed, it would make Oregon the first state to increase the minimum tax on large businesses and send the cash to all residents, guaranteeing them a minimum income. And it would also implement the largest tax increase in Oregon history, which, as we all know, it hurts Oregon's economy and drives up costs for Oregon businesses and consumers, I would say, at the worst possible time.
Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing the Bidenflation happen right now with massive inflation all over the nation. And we're seeing it maybe come down a little bit, but each state is being impacted individually at its own harsh rate. Talk about the details of how, obviously, they're going to tax the businesses, but what do they define as a wealthy business or as an evil corporation? I mean, is there a threshold of what they say is a small business you're going to be protected here, or is it just going to be every business across the board in the state?
Right. So under Measure 118, the existing minimum tax regime would be replaced with a 3% gross receipts tax for large businesses imposed on all Oregon revenue, regardless of level of profitability or lack of profitability. So a business with 100 million in gross sales into Oregon would pay about 2.75 million in taxes. And it's basically the 3% on the amount above $25 million. But even if it suffered losses. So businesses with low profit margins, like the grocery industry, would face taxes that far outstrip their net income. And as we know, like an ideal sales tax falls one time on final consumption. But a gross receipt tax falls on the entire sales price at every stage of production, meaning that it kind of pyramids with the tax embedded in the final price many times over. And with many businesses put at a competitive advantage because their tax liability wipes out their profits or can even drive them into the red. And so all this adds up to a tax that not only harms Oregon's economy, thereby hurting employment and income and population, but it also would raid the existing state treasury. With taxes going up, $8 billion, the state would find itself in a $2 billion hole in their general fund. And it would force, hundreds of local businesses to raise their prices, cut jobs, or just even shut down like completely.
It's a scary thought. I mean, if we're already seeing red in the forecast, then that's a problem. Let's take a step back a little bit and let's talk about the industries and the economy right now before something like this would even be implemented. Have you seen in that area, have they seen in the state of Oregon a growth in business, corporations moving to that area, wanting to invest in manufacturing or whatever industries are popular there, which we'll get to in a minute? But have we seen a growth economically of businesses wanting to come to that area before something like this even takes hold?
Yeah, no, actually, sadly, taxes on Oregon businesses have actually increased 43% in just the last 5 years. And Oregon's corporate tax rank is already the second worst in the country. So if this passed, it would actually make local Oregon businesses less competitive with out-of-state companies, driving more jobs and revenue out of the state and actually hurting their local economies. And they're estimating the state, like estimated 2,401 businesses will be directly impacted by this measure.
What is some of the biggest industries in there? I'm not familiar with Oregon as much, but what are some of the bigger industries that you see across the state?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like wood production, and it kind of like they use like a lot of the no measure uses that as a kind of a way to describe how the tax pyramids, like just saying like if you take a piece of wood, for example, like there's all stages that the wood goes through. So like it is cut down in the forests of Oregon, and then that person like sells it to, a raw materials, sells it to a manufacturer, and that's taxed at 3%. Then the manufacturer sells it to a packaging company, and that gets taxed at the 3%. Then the packaging company sells it to the distributor, and that adds 3%. Then the distributor sends it to a retailer, which that would be another 3%. And then it gets to the consumer. So it would make Oregon products more expensive again. And it just adds like a ton on. That's something that actually the timber is a big deal because, housing costs are already expensive, as we know, across the country, especially in Oregon. And a lot of people, also use like 2x4s and wood all the time to do projects in their home, whether it's, building a deck or fixing a deck or things like that. So that would directly impact them on something so simple as like a 2x4.
Well, and like you said, I mean, from every process of the way, by the time it actually gets to the consumer, you're talking at like 15% additional when it comes to taxes and regulations that are on top of these products, which leads to the next question. What's that going to do to the consumer that actually tries to buy these products? Because I'm guaranteeing you, I could be wrong, Heather, but I'm guessing that a business is not going to turn around and just eat that stuff, but they're going to end up raising their costs at the end of the day, aren't they? Yes.
And unfortunately it does. It sounds like a classic tax on big business, but it functions like an aggressive sales tax on consumers. And, again, like imagine like everyone goes to the grocery store and buy a $10 frozen dinner. So, for that product to get to you, a farmer had to grow the crops or raise the livestock. Food processor had to turn it into a frozen dinner, and a wholesaler had to facilitate it getting from the food processor to the local grocery store. And then your grocer had to staff a store at which you could purchase it. So again, each stage of that process and many more transactions could be subject to the tax. So you're seeing like right now, a $10 frozen dinner is now taxed at like just under 5%. So it would be like 49.6 cents tax. But if this passes, there's a potential for it to grow about 10.9%. So we'd see it from 49.6 to $1.09 in tax, which meaning that the new tax would be about 220% of pre-tax profits. And obviously, yes, most of the cost has to be shifted to consumers. It literally cannot come out of profits. And so, according to the state calculations, corporate taxes on wholesale and retail businesses will increase by 840%. And that's industry wide, including, businesses that are not even subject to the new tax. Corporate taxes on construction will soar 1,064%, more than 10 times the current amount. Taxes on utilities will skyrocket 1,901%. Healthcare taxes will be more than 8 times their current levels. And then transportation, they're saying an estimate of about 5-fold increase. But that's not even the end, because it also includes like a hold harmless provision that could be very impossibly difficult to implement. So it requires, Oregon residents to be made whole in case that income, the $1,600 would push them out of losing federal benefits. So that includes like SNAP and WIC and Medicaid, CHIP, SSI, and some of the home energy assistance programs. And so the state of Oregon would have to figure out an alternative scenario eligibility for each of those programs on its own, and then provide offsetting payments. So like, for instance, if someone with intellectual disabilities sees their income increase, they might not only lose some or all of their Medicaid provided benefits, but also their housing and home assistance and more. And then Oregon would have to figure out how to make them whole. So that's also an interesting prospect.
Yeah. So in other words, another government program on top of a government program. We're going to give you more money. Oh, you hit the threshold. You don't qualify anymore. Well, let's create another program to where you still qualify after we give you this money.
And they asked, and then it's like, how are those? I mean, like they're going to have to hire, the state said, about 199 new individuals just to figure out how that's going to, how to make them whole. And so again, like you talked about earlier, inflation is hitting people hard, and the average Oregon household is already paying about $11,000 more due to inflation over the last several years. The state budget office did say too, with the passage, this measure could lead to the loss of over 28,000 jobs over the next 5 years. And again, a huge net loss to the state's general fund in every biennium. So not the greatest thing in the world. And even I loved what Mark Meek said, who is actually a Democrat, and he chairs the Senate Revenue Committee. And he called the measure a debacle and said, after like watching a 45-minute presentation about the possible costs, he's like, I'm more confused now than ever. And he just, he's like, everyone's like, it's very poorly written. It was written to be sexy to those people that have children and families that want money in their pockets, but they don't understand the cost, what it's going to take, and even if it's going to benefit them. So I kind of loved that comment by him, because it does really speak to how most people are feeling about this measure.
Well, on a positive side as well, it almost reiterates the fact that our governmental system wasn't set up to do things like this, right? Because it almost makes our system so complicated that it doesn't work at all, and it fails and it falls right on its face, because we weren't meant to get universal basic income. We weren't meant to live off of social programs our entire life. And when they do try to implement this, it really just rocks the entire boat, and it fails because they don't know how to actually operate it.
Right. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, that's crazy. We're talking with Heather Andrews. She's the Western Regional State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Every time we hear these types of conversations, it almost seems like a hamster wheel. We always go down the same cyclical road. Is we tax the corporation, we give it to the people. The corporation raises the prices of their goods. And then what's going to happen? Like you mentioned, the price of the good is going to get more expensive. So I'm guessing then, is it the raise that you got and the more money in your pocket, Heather, is going to compensate a little bit, but now you have to go out and purchase more items, which are more expensive. And then we're back in the same boat, is I can't afford the same goods because now the prices are too expensive. So guess what? Now I need more money, or I need more minimum wage hikes, or I need a raise, or I need something. And then we go through the entire cycle all over again, but it's a never ending cycle that seems like it's on the pathway to destruction, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. How do we stop a cycle like that? Because like you said, this is very appealing to some people, and specifically those with families. If we're going to give you this additional money, how do we stop that cycle? Because obviously that kills off the American potential. It kills off the opportunity to grow and actually for you to survive on your own. What do we do to change that mindset for people, do you think? Right.
I mean, I think a lot of people aren't really... I think a lot of people are smart. I think voters are very smart, and they understand that nothing is free. There's no free lunch. I mean, I remember my mom teaching me about, I got really confused about how there were some kids that were eating lunch that got free lunch in school. And I was a little frustrated. I'm like, how come they get this free lunch for free every day? And I was like, why can't I get one? Why can't I get a free lunch? And my mom was really good to explain, like, nothing's free. Like, this money came from somewhere. Government does not create wealth. Government does not create jobs. And that money came from people's, taxpayers. And it's going to come. And like we talked about already, like, corporations are just individuals, and profit isn't evil. That's a signal that is saying there was value exchanged. And that's a good thing, that people value what these companies are making and they're profitable. That's a market signal that they're doing something right. And so when we punish the people that are producing in this country and economy, we're going to see some really bad, we're going to see a destructive of our system. And I mean, I love that, I think one of the biggest donors of this measure said, this is really about the fact that this Measure 118 represents the most exciting opportunity to fight against poverty anywhere in the United States. And I just think that's really depressing and sad that he and other proponents don't understand history and basic economics. Because if they understood anything and understood history, then they would know that the free enterprise and free market system is the only system that has brought the most people out of poverty than any other system in the history of mankind. And it's had the most impact on improving economic mobility, equality, safety, production, life expectancy, and overall happiness, like across the entire world for years. And so, yeah, the further we stray from this, the worse life becomes for like everyone.
That's a great point. I mean, we're here to try and raise people up, and we can't do that through the government. And every time it's been tested that way, we see it fall flat on its face because we've almost seemed to change the narrative, haven't we, when it comes to the difference between equal opportunity and equal outcome. I mean, we hear the talking points all the time with different political ideologies in the country of we want an equal outcome as opposed to an equal opportunity. If you and I have the same starting ground of an equal opportunity with opportunities in front of us, then it's based on our choices and what we choose to do with that to either succeed or fail. And we've kind of steered away from that, haven't we?
Right. Absolutely. Agreed.
Very sad. With something like a universal basic income, even though it starts small like this, like you said, $1,500, $1,600 a year, right now, this is the launching pad. I mean, eventually, where do you think they would go with this? Do you think they'd be giving us our $50,000 salaries every year and saying, you don't even really need to work. We're just going to let you sit at home and just do your thing.
Right. I mean, who knows what the end goal is here? It just makes me really sad that they feel like that this is the best way. And, we know it's not. We know that, that there's a lot of negatives to handouts that discourage people from working, that incentivize the behavior we don't want to see. I mean, when you have able-bodied individuals, the more that we give them or government gives them to live and incentivizes them to do the opposite of working for themselves, we cripple their hope for a future, really.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. You've kind of teased this already, but for those people that are listening outside of the state of Oregon, would it affect them as well? Obviously, there's a lot of goods that travel outside of the state that you produce in Oregon and then transport around the country. And I'm assuming those prices would go up as well, wouldn't they? I mean, what does the rest of the nation have to look forward to this impact?
Yeah. So, proponents always say, it's the vast majority of the largest corporations that would be paying this new tax. They're kind of out of state ones like Comcast and Kroger and Wells Fargo. But yes, like you mentioned, like these companies sell products and services to thousands of people and small businesses across Oregon and across the country. And so take a restaurant, for example. That restaurant buys not only food and beverages, they buy internet and cable services, they buy insurance for the business, for their employees, they buy like a host of products. And all of which could be way more expensive if this measure passes, because, that's what happens. They're going to pass the cost along to consumers and a lot of these are, can be small businesses, and many which already struggle to make ends meet and try to stay in business.
Yeah. Just scary thoughts. Now, you mentioned, obviously we focus a little bit on kind of the wood industry and the tree industry, but there's a lot of technology in Oregon as well, isn't there? Obviously Portland, a little bit larger metropolitan area. Is there a lot of that boom, kind of like what we see a little bit north of that in Seattle, Washington, with kind of the tech industry that's settled themselves into that area? Would they be impacted on this as well?
I'm not 100% sure about that. It kind of made me sad to see some of like the tech people also like kind of jump on board on the proponent side of this. They think and I think that again goes to a lack of awareness or lack of like understanding of, the basic principles of economics. But yeah, I would imagine any company and business and corporation is going to be affected, and then it's going to trickle downstream. So yeah.
Well, yeah. And if you look at like, the wilderness stuff, for example, working on trees, obviously being a coastal state as well, then you have the fisheries and you have people. There's a lot of people that work on the outdoors, and I respect the heck out of it. I doubt that they're making $100,000 a year in those types of industries right now. So every little change like this is going to vastly impact them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's really scary. What's the talk on the streets right now? As you guys, talk to people on, door knocking and getting ready for the election, what is the mindset? Are there a lot of people that have bought into this, so this is a great idea, or is there skepticism right now?
I mean, looking, there is definitely skepticism. But we all know, like, there's a lot of people that are still that don't even know about the measure. And a lot of people aren't paying attention. They've just kind of tuned out because of obviously the political landscape that we're living in right now. And sadly, they're not doing a lot of research. And so there's, I think, I can't remember the latest numbers, but there is a lot. I'm happy to see that there's a huge, long bipartisan list of opponents, including, the Democrat governor of Oregon, Tina Kotek. Mostly all state legislators are opposed. Labor unions, which we're not usually on the same side of. Right. And then, obviously businesses, and then even progressive groups like, Oregon Center for Public Policy and others who are usually like, yes, let's tax the big corporations. Their main thing is like, oh, no, we can't just give it to everyone. Like, there has to be, we only should be giving it to the poor people and the people who really need it. So they're opposed for different reasons, but it is good to be on the same side of them on this issue for sure.
Yeah, that is interesting. Do they have an arbitrary line of who's lower class and who's middle class or upper class? I mean, where do they draw that line on who should deserve this and not deserve it?
I think whatever poverty level is, they're like, if they're under a certain amount of poverty level, then we need to be giving it to those individuals versus everyone across the board. Because right now, it includes all the rich people. All those evil rich people should not be given their fair share.
That's right. Yeah. You're not paying your fair share. Right. Have they tried to tie it to a conversation as well on minimum wage and say, well, we need to give you this money, but we also need to get you up to a quote unquote livable wage if you're working at an entry level position for whatever reason. So have they tried to tie that conversation into it as well?
No, I haven't heard that on this measure. They're really focused on, again, just highlighting the fact that big, bad, evil corporations are not paying their fair share to Oregonians. And so they should be paying their fair share. And wouldn't it be nice for you to get $1,400 back and up to, like if a family of, however many family could, be $6,800 to use towards whatever. It's not going to, they always say, oh, it's not going to like really do a whole lot to help in this economy, but it's going to do something to help. Don't you want that for you and your family? So they make it sound really, really like it's a sweet deal. And I think a lot of people do think, oh, that does sound good. But then when they think about it further, then they realize, well, where's the money coming from? And they dig in a little bit further. They see, oh, it's the largest sales tax in the history of the state. And I think Oregonians too have been on the hook for a lot of things where they've heard, oh, this is what we're going to do. We're going to pass this and it's going to be great. It's going to lead to this and it's going to lead to better services and better opportunities for everyone. And they've seen the financial cost to them, and they've seen the lack of services that have been provided, and they're just sick of it. They're like, we don't believe you anymore.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the big question. I mean, you're paying up, with taxes. Is it really translating into services being run efficiently by the government? And 99% of the time, they can always say no. Absolutely not. So, I mean, I would hope at least that would be a good answer for them. We're talking with Heather Andrews. She is the Western Regional State Director for Americans for Prosperity with the great state of Oregon, looking at this pilot program, the initial kickoff of a potential universal basic income, starting off small and watching this grow. Heather, you mentioned a while ago, the potential budget that this could destroy in the state, where they would actually see them go backwards because of the regulations that needed to be implemented, the hiring and a brand new agency to oversee this entire thing. Do they have an answer to that? What would be the solution there other than, well, now we've created the sales tax, let's go ahead and create like a corporate income tax or an additional one there? I mean, what's their solution to say, if we do go into the red because of this growth of government, we need to find a way to compensate for this?
Right. So they're saying that they'll work with the legislature on that to ensure that it will be a neutral thing. They will figure it out. basically after it passes. So just vote yes, and we'll figure it out. Just trust the legislature and trust us to get it right, and we'll fix it after it passes.
We need to pass it to see what's in it, right?
Yes.
So the old motto, we got to pass it to see actually how it's going to work and see what's in it.
Yeah.
I don't know that I necessarily like experimental bills like that. And if
yeah.
they don't have a plan, then I don't know how many people would want to trust something like that.
Right. And I think that's why we're seeing, people like Tina Kotek, Democrats and, the state, the senator who's the chair of the Rev and Tax Committee opposing it and saying, this is not a good idea. And I mean, I'm not necessarily always on board with them either. And I don't necessarily love the growth of government, but it will impact social services, like their ability to provide that safety net to those who are the most vulnerable in the state, which I do believe is necessary. And I do believe that is a proper function of government, is to provide for those who cannot provide for themselves. And so social services being cut, other essential services being cut is a big problem. It's a big problem. And I think that that's what they're looking at and saying, how are we going to fix that? How are we going to make that right? And yeah, it's not an easy thing to fix.
No, and you're right. I mean, we're not big government ones that like social programs to be the main dominance, but the programs we already have in place that aren't even running efficiently now, you're saying it would even impact them to make them even worse, which of course then we see the government riding in like the Gandalf on the great white horse wanting to come and save the day, because even though their own program isn't working efficiently, they'll have a solution later on. But you're saying the programs are going to be even more devastated than what they are right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. $2 billion hole is not great for the state treasury. And I think, legislators losing that money and the governor losing that money doesn't sit well with them. I think they're, even though I think government spends way above what it should spend, that's a big deal. And then, yeah.
I agree. Yeah. Have you seen, I don't track this, I don't know if you've tracked it or not either, but kind of the population, the ebbing and the flowing, people moving to the state of Oregon compared to people leaving the state. I know we've seen it in California, obviously, and Washington, to be a matter of fact, that they've been leaving the states because of these high taxes and high regulations already. Are we seeing that trend now as it stands before something like this would be implemented? And if they do get it passed, then do you think that would affect that with people wanting to leave as well because of the drying up of jobs and opportunity?
Yes, I think we saw a lot of individuals get frustrated with what happened with the state's response during COVID. They shut down a lot of, like businesses. A lot of small businesses went out of business because they weren't deemed essential services by the state, and they couldn't afford to keep their door closed for months and months on end. And so, there were businesses that were forced to leave the state that way. And then individuals got tired of like not allowing, the schools to be open, and just the huge overreach of government in that regard. So I know that there was a lot of people that left due to that. And then, yes, as the state has increased, and I think they have a problem with getting businesses to want to come to Oregon. And they have been big on no sales taxes. They've been a big state that's opposed to additional sales taxes. So it would really surprise and shock me if they were to pass something like this. And hopefully they see through it, like we've talked about, and understand that there is no free money. But we'll see.
Yeah. Last question for you as we kind of wrap things up here and got a few minutes left. Talk about some of the other taxes that are in Oregon and how this would kind of fall in line with them when it comes to income tax for the state and property tax rates. Here in Kansas, where I'm based out of, we finally just got rid of our sales tax on groceries, and we are only one of 6 states in the nation that still did that. And we're finally getting rid of it. That takes effect in January, which is good news in large part because of the work of Americans for Prosperity here in Kansas. So if this were implemented with this ongoing sales tax on goods and the corporations, how would that fall in line with the rest of the taxes everybody has to deal with out there? Yeah,
it would just add to it. I mean, again, like I kind of said earlier, like Oregonians are already seeing like an additional $11,000 the average family is having to pay due to inflation and other costs and things like that. And again, like we are seeing Oregon businesses have had an increase in taxes in about, I think it was like, what did I say? 40, I think it was like 43% increase in just the last 5 years.
Wow.
And again, their corporate tax rate is the second worst in the entire country. So it is not going to do anything good for the state to again drive, jobs and continue to persuade more businesses to come in. It's actually going to do the opposite. We're going to see a lot less competition with out-of-state companies and we're going to see a lot more people just leaving because of the unaffordability and businesses.
Yeah, there's got to be a reset at some point. At some point, people are going to say, yeah, enough's enough and we can't deal with this. And while that $1,600, $1,400 may sound nice out of the gate, eventually when they go to the store and they're paying so much more on their groceries or the wood or the lumber at Lowe's or whatever they have to do, then they're going to realize, wow, maybe this wasn't the greatest idea, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Last thing for you is your message to the listeners now of this initiative in Oregon, plus all the other initiatives that may be going on this election season, the spooky, scary bills as we go into Halloween season. What is the call to action here to get people out to vote right now? I know that obviously Americans for Prosperity, you guys have boots on the grounds all over the place across the nation right now. But what's the messaging right now to let people know, hey, this is the time for us to make it the biggest election that we can?
Right. I mean, honestly, it comes down to, are you happy? Are you satisfied with what you're paying right now? Do you feel like you can, are you better off than you were 4 or 5 years ago? Or have things gotten worse? And if you're feeling like things have gotten worse, then I implore you to do your research and take action. Including voting, but also sharing with other people what's on the ballot. If you live in Oregon and you're considering this measure, go and you're like educated and you're like, I can't let this pass. Go share it with your friends and family. If you have friends and family that are in Oregon, make sure you talk to them about this. And same thing goes with any other state. Like, make sure you know what's on the ballot. Do your research. And then make sure you're voting for, things that are going to make you more prosperous in the best way possible and longest term way possible, which is lower taxes, less government, and and then help. And then also volunteer with Americans for Prosperity. We are doing a great job with making phone calls across the country and knocking doors in some of the key states where it really matters and makes a difference. Yeah.
So what it's all about, it's about that individual sovereignty, that individual freedom. And like you said, I mean, the collective, even though there's a difference between the individual and the collective does well when the individual does well. It's not the other way around. They can't make the collective do well that then makes somehow the individual flourish. We have to do it. And when we do well, then the community does well as a whole. And I think that that's a message that's kind of got lost throughout the years of political rhetoric that we've heard, haven't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sadly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, sadly. Exactly. Heather Andrews, she is the Western Regional State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Fascinating conversation. I hope that this vote goes the right direction, but keep up that fight where you're at. We appreciate everything you do and really enjoy the conversation. We got to do it again soon.
Yes. Thanks, Andy. Appreciate it.
You betcha. You as well. Appreciate that. Again, if you want to get connected with Americans for Prosperity in your state chapter, wherever you might be, you can always email Jeff Crank, the normal host of the program here, at jeff@americanpotential.com. As you know, the American Potential podcast always working on different stories like this to help you be inspired and informed, especially going into such a massive election that we're seeing this year with candidates and issues all over the country. And the best way to stay connected is by liking and subscribing to this channel, obviously, as well as following us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Again, my name's Andy Hooser, nationally syndicated host of the Voice of Reason radio program. Always appreciate being able to jump in here and sit in for Jeff, and we appreciate your time very much here on the show.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.